My name is Noah Duncan, and this is a discussion of my assigned article, Changing Health Behaviors Using Financial Incentives, a review from Behavioral Economics. The article begins with some background that states, the effect of individual behavior on health outcomes is considerable, with estimates that up to 40% of premature deaths in the developed world are attributable to unhealthy behaviors such as smoking, poor diet, and sedentary lifestyle, which is a significant statistic, and it definitely seems that people would benefit from dropping those habits. And so, the article is discussing how we can use financial incentives in order to curb those habits and help contribute to a better lifestyle for people. In the background, we get some examples of incentive schemes like the Give It Up for Baby program, which was to encourage pregnant smokers to quit the habit, and Pounds for Pounds, which was intended to influence weight control. And at the end of the background, we get a section about concerns that do exist to using these incentives. But more on that gets discussed in the article later. We get some places where there are some reasons why incentives are being looked into. On the government side, there was a book called Nudge that discusses moving people towards better lifestyle choices, and some other examples such as that. And we move on to the largest part of the article, which is the aspects that they're focusing on, the phenomena that contribute to an ideal financial incentive scheme, because it's important to make sure that these schemes are doing the most that they can to succeed. And the primary phenomena that contribute to the best financial incentive scheme, or at least towards improving it, are the concepts of loss aversion, overweighting of small probabilities, hyperbolic discounting, increasing instead of decreasing payoffs, and reference points. And the first of those, loss aversion, refers to the idea that people are more averse to a loss of the equivalent amount than they are attracted to a gain of the equivalent amount. People are more afraid to lose $100 than they are attracted to the prospect of gaining $100. And so it's beneficial to an incentive scheme to try and frame it such that a person has a reward promised, and that if they fail to arrive, that they could lose part of that reward. In the case of they use the case of someone in a weight loss program. Instead of just giving a $10 reward for each session that they attend, it's beneficial to promise a $100 reward at the end of the program, but each session that you miss reduces the $10. So it's effectively paying them the same amount, but making it more likely that they'll try to arrive in order to reach that better outcome. The next one, the overweighting of small probabilities, is that there is a tendency for people to think more about small probabilities than they're actually worth, which explains a great deal of lotteries, because people, even though there's an incredibly small chance that a lottery would actually succeed, that they tend to overweight that. Following that, the hyperbolic discounting, what they refer to as living for today at the expense of tomorrow. People tend to weigh today more importantly than they do tomorrow. That is, the present, things that are more readily available in front of people, tends to occupy more of their minds and be more attractive to them than the possibility of obtaining things over time. And that's dangerous in things such as finances, but it's also difficult in the case of trying to make a recurring incentive scheme work, because it means that people have a harder time of seeing the importance of appearing over and over again to try and improve their health. And usually it means that immediate incentives tend to be more successful than recurring ones. Weight loss programs have a harder time than an incentive for people to show up to obtain a one-time vaccination, because that's in the present, so people will value that more, because it's easier for them to do. After that, people tend to prefer increasing rather than decreasing payoffs. That seems obvious, but even in the case of something that isn't decreasing, that the payout is simply constant, people will find themselves being unattracted to that as time goes on. Rather, it's more effective to increase the payoffs over time. So if you started with a low incentive and increased it upwards into a higher one, that would be successful in trying to get people to appear to more recurring incentive programs. And finally is the concept of reference points, which essentially means that people care more about what they already have than what they can end up with. And the example that they use here is that a lot of people that are tested for HIV don't actually pick up the results of those tests, because people would prefer what they already have right now than to even take the risk that they may or may not have HIV, because that would shake up what they have right now, and they prefer that. They prefer the safer option. And after that, we move into a section that is ethical concerns. And the first of those that they point out is that as you use incentives in order to influence people's behavioral health, it can diminish the intrinsic motivation to perform the activities later. The intrinsic motivation being the people deciding to do it on their own for their health. By paying them, you're making it less likely that they'll bother to do that when they aren't getting a reward later. And following that, they come back to the potential for coercion. So some people liken the incentives idea to bribery, and that it is somewhat unfair to be paying people for something that is ultimately to their own benefit. And then they state that an important concern is whether the incentive program is both effective in its goal and cost-effective. Because if it doesn't work, and if it takes too much money even for it to work, then it's unwise to implement it because you're just throwing people's money away. And their conclusion is that there is limited evidence that suggests incentives can work in inducing healthy outcomes. And the main issue with that is that incentives require a great deal of different factors to line up correctly. That there are many different variations on the situations that may or may not be successful at using financial incentives. And so, their primary conclusion is that more research is necessary into the required aspects of incentives to determine under what circumstances they can be effective and under which they are a waste of time and money.